Virginia was burning up with a 40-degree fever that day, trembling as she called Clyde, begging him to come home, but he was with Zoe, tutoring her at a hotel until the early hours. Afterward, he explained, she was under too much pressure before the finals. I couldn't just abandon my student. The day Virginia had stomach surgery, she signed the consent form alone. Clyde, meanwhile, was judging Zoe's speech competition. That time, he said, the judge was absent at the last minute. And the school insisted I fill in, and this time, Virginia found out she was pregnant and rushed straight to Clyde's lab, only to see him hand-washing Zoe's underwear. Madam, what brings you here? 3 young people in lab coats stood in the hallway, holding data boxes, and when they saw her, their faces were filled with displeasure. Mister, Clyde said, outsiders aren't allowed in the lab, and we're at a critical stage right now, so don't hold us back. Even if you're a housewife and don't understand the importance of scientific research, at least don't be a hindrance, right? Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. The sharp accusations made Virginia's eardrums buzz. She pointed inside the glass. Is that also one of the experimental projects? The 3 of them looked over, their expressions instantly turning complex. One bespectacled boy cleared his throat and said, Zoe worked through the night yesterday, so she didn't notice her period staining her clothes. What's wrong with the professor helping her? Exactly, it's all for the experiment. Zoe hasn't slept well for over half a month because of the project. Meanwhile, you, the professor's wife, are just making a mountain out of a molehill. In their eyes, Zoe could do no wrong, while even her breathing was a mistake. During the early stages of the experiment, she cooked meals daily and delivered them to the lab, only for them to complain that the bowls and utensils she brought were riddled with germs. Halfway through the project, someone came down with a fever. She spent the whole night studying, then scoured pharmacies to buy all 48 common medications and sent them over, only for them to be tossed into the trash without a glance. We're medical students ourselves. What kind of joke is it for someone with only a middle school education like you to buy medicine? Virginia's face was full of bitterness. She also remembered how, last month, her period had suddenly come early, and she'd stained her skirt in a mall restroom. At that time Clyde happened to be nearby, and in her embarrassment, she borrowed his coat to wrap around her waist. After returning home, she personally washed that expensive coat 3 times, made sure it was spotless, and even ironed it smooth. But when she returned it, Clyde casually tossed it into a roadside clothing donation bin. You know, I have a thing about cleanliness, he explained at the time, frowning slightly. But now, behind the glass wall, Clyde moves with patience and gentleness, washing another woman's blood-stained underwear and carefully hanging it on a clothes rack. She finally understood that his misophobia was also selective. Virginia, seemingly having finally noticed her. Clyde pushed the door open, his voice as gentle as ever. Next time, give me a heads up before you come. That way, I can arrange for someone to disinfect the place for you. Virginia's nails dug into her palms. The joy she felt when she found out she was pregnant had completely vanished, and she couldn't bring herself to take out the prenatal checkup report. You also think I shouldn't be in the lab? I didn't mean it that way. Clyde's expression remained unchanged. It's just that everyone has to go through the disinfection process. Teacher, don't be so serious. Zoe's voice came from behind, and she walked intimately to Clyde's side. She smiled at Virginia. It's not mistress's fault. Our experiment is almost done today anyway, so why don't we go grab a meal together first? Virginia noticed that she was wearing Clyde's spare shirt, the hem of which just reached mid-thigh. I don't. The refusal was stillborn. Zoe had already linked arms with her. Come on, let's go. I know a great new Japanese restaurant nearby. The salmon, which is teacher's favorite, is really fresh there. As she was dragged to the table, Virginia saw Clyde naturally pull out the chair to his left, and then Zoe sat down. Why is there only wasabi again? Zoe had barely pouted when the hands beside her moved their soy sauce in front of her. I've already mixed it for you. Watching them exchange dipping sauces and hearing the students praise Mr. Clyde and Zoe as the most perfect research in academia, Virginia felt a wave of nausea rise in her stomach. Why isn't the professor's wife touching her chopsticks? A short-haired girl blinked and suddenly spoke up. Is it because you're not used to such high-end Japanese cuisine? It's quite understandable. The professor's wife spends all her time by the stove. How could she have tasted these things before? Virginia couldn't possibly miss their sarcasm. What bothered her was only Clyde's indifference and apathy. Actually, she wasn't a housewife from the start. Her marriage to Clyde began in a rather inglorious, even cliched, way. That year, her mother tragically died saving Clyde's grandmother. To repay this kindness, the old woman spoke, asking Clyde to marry her. He was naturally aloof, yet filial to his elders, so he didn't refuse the marriage. After marrying her, Their relationship remained lukewarm, but Virginia took it to heart. His stomach was weak, and his busy experiments often made him forget meals. Heartbroken for him, she quit her job to prepare medicinal dishes for him daily with meticulous care. He kept irregular hours, sometimes forgetting sleep during busy periods. Night after night she waited for his return, always leaving a light on for him and simmering a pot of nourishing soup. She thought he would always see the good in her, but looking at the harmonious atmosphere between the two people in front of her, watching him carefully pick out the sashimi Zoe didn't like, she finally understood that perhaps she had been wrong from the very beginning. Virginia couldn't bear to watch anymore. She was just about to find an excuse to leave early, but then, Zoe, across from her, suddenly turned red in the face, scratching at her neck, her breathing becoming increasingly rapid. Zoe, Clyde, being closest to her, immediately steadied her swaying body. A group of people quickly rose to their feet, until the bespectacled boy suddenly pointed at Virginia. "You sprayed perfume, didn't you? You know perfectly well that Zoe is allergic to floral scents." Virginia shook her head blankly. "I didn't, I never, it was her. I smelled it just now," the short-haired girl shrieked. "We call you madam out of respect for the professor, not so you can do whatever you want. You knew Zoe was allergic and still did this. That's truly malicious." Someone was on the verge of tears. "Quick, take Zoe to the hospital. Allergies can be fatal." Clyde scooped up Zoe, who was struggling to breathe. As he left, he cast a glance back at Virginia, the disappointment in his eyes like a dull knife, slowly carving open her chest. "Get out of the way. Are you still going to block us now?" The others swarmed forward, pushing Virginia aside. She hit her head hard on the corner of the marble table, instinctively reaching out, but a sharp pain shot through her lower abdomen. Clyde continued walking without pause, the surrounding sounds quickly fading away. Virginia lowered her head and only then saw the crimson liquid trickling down the inside of her thigh. It was the restaurant owner who rushed over upon hearing the commotion. Seeing the pool of blood on the floor, his hands trembled as he pulled out his phone to call an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, Virginia's consciousness grew increasingly hazy, yet everything about Clyde appeared vividly before her eyes like a revolving lantern. Over the past 6 months, for 68 days, Clyde didn't come home for dinner, all because of those experimental projects he was rushing to complete, projects related to Zoe's graduation. 3 times when she was sick and unwell, he said drink more water over the phone, and through the fuzzy static, Zoe's urging voice could be heard. Then he didn't return all night, and today, for who knows how many times, between her and Zoe, he chose the latter. It seems Zoe's matters are always urgent and immediate, while with her, it's always wait and hold on a little longer. Virginia suddenly felt utterly exhausted. "The baby can't be saved. We warned you before that this pregnancy was unstable. How could you be so careless?" When she regained consciousness in the hospital, the doctor's slightly reproachful words were the first thing she heard. "Where's the father of your child? If you're being careless, shouldn't he know better?" Just as the words were spoken, the door to the hospital room was pushed open from outside. Clyde walked in, his brow slightly furrowed. "What child?" The doctor was about to answer, but just as he uttered the words "her body," he was gently interrupted by Virginia. "Doctor, please go attend to your duties." "I'm fine." The doctor hesitated, then finally just sighed, only instructing her to rest well before leaving. Only 2 people remained in the ward. Clyde frowned slightly, his gaze fixed on her pale face. "What's wrong with you?" Virginia turned her head slightly, avoiding his gaze. "Just a bout of hypoglycemia. It's nothing." Clyde didn't doubt her. He simply pinched the bridge of his nose, his voice still gentle, but tinged with a hint of weariness. "I know your life revolves around me, so you might be a bit extreme about certain things, but you need to understand that severe allergies can be fatal. Zoe is understanding and won't hold you accountable, but you should at least show some sincerity and apologize to her." Virginia's eyes welled up, and she quickly lowered her head again. Ever since she married him, she hadn't bothered to dress up, so how could she have worn perfume? But Clyde didn't even ask, he just directly accepted the student's accusations. Perhaps he never cared about the truth of the matter, and from the bottom of his heart, he believed she was such a jealous person. She had just lost her child and was so weak that even breathing was an effort, yet he seemed not to notice her exhaustion at all, only wanting her to confess to a fabricated crime and apologize to Zoe sooner. A chill spread through her heart. Little by little, she was silent for a moment, then finally nodded, "Okay." As he stood up, Clyde's phone rang. He looked down at his messages, not noticing her legs trembling so much she could barely stand when she got out of bed. Virginia tugged at the corner of her lips, leaning against the wall, and walked step by step towards Zoe's ward. The closer she got to the ward, the more clearly she could see the worry on Clyde's face. It was truly laughable. He was always calm and distant when facing her, But the thought of Zoe made his brows furrow unconsciously. The door swung open. And in the blinding white light, several students stood around the hospital bed. Seeing Virginia, their faces instantly fell. This is Virginia's fault. She's here to admit her mistake. Clyde's tone was flat, and he subtly gestured for Virginia to approach the bed, standing amidst their scornful gazes. Virginia took 2 steps forward, took a deep breath, and bowed to the slightly weakened person on the bed. Sorry, Zoe quickly sat up, a knowing smile on her face. Madam, please don't be like this. I know you just wanted to impress the professor, which is why you sprayed perfume. I understand. She tugged at the corner of her lips, too weary to explain. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Wait, a bespectacled boy suddenly called out to her, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Since you're usually so idle at home as the professor's wife, and this incident was your fault, how could a mere apology suffice? Why don't you take care of Zoe until she fully recovers? The others chimed in one after another, their words laced with such venom that it seemed like having Virginia care for Zoe was some grand act of mercy bestowed upon her. Virginia froze momentarily, instinctively turning her gaze toward Clyde. He, however, simply picked up a fruit knife in silence, skillfully peeling an apple for Zoe without even lifting his head. All right, I'll go grocery shopping now. Please send me Zoe's dietary restrictions, lest I make another mistake. Clyde then stopped what he was doing, pulled out his phone, and while typing, said to the classmates beside him, I told you, Virginia didn't mean it, and she genuinely apologized to Zoe. She's very sensitive. Don't make any more inappropriate jokes. This seemingly excusing but actually critical remark, implying she was overly sensitive and petty, left Virginia speechless for a moment. The hospital is deserted at night, and Zoe isn't well. I'm worried she won't be safe alone here, so why don't you stay and keep her company tonight, and take good care of her while you're at it, Virginia said, enunciating each word, then turned and left. The door closed behind her, cutting off all sound from the ward. As she walked down the hallway, leaning against the wall on her way to her own room, she pulled out her phone. She stared at the pinned message for a long time before finally pressing the call button. The moment the call connected, she heard her own slightly weary voice say, Teacher, I've made up my mind. I'll take the advanced study spot you mentioned before. The person on the other end was clearly delighted, their speech quickening. I knew you wouldn't abandon the legacy of Chinese medicine for a man. I'll process the paperwork immediately. Get ready, you can leave in a week. Hanging up the phone, Virginia turned around, only to find that Clyde had also stepped out of the ward at some point and was standing behind her. Virginia's heart sank, and her fingers unconsciously tightened around her phone. How much did he hear? But the next second, Clyde simply walked quickly towards her, his brow slightly furrowed, his tone as gentle as ever. There's a problem at the lab. I need to go back and deal with it immediately. No one's really eaten since last night's incident. You can go back and prepare something. Your medicinal cuisine is actually quite good. Virginia lowered her gaze, a self-mocking curve playing on her lips. She had actually worried he would object just now, but in reality, he didn't even have the slightest interest in asking about the phone call. She should have been used to it. He never bothered himself with her affairs. I know, don't worry, she's your most valued student. So how could I make things difficult for you? I'm not. Clyde frowned, about to say something, when his phone suddenly rang. How about this? Once this project is over, I'll take you on a trip to clear your head. Before he finished speaking, he quickly answered the call, turned, and left, watching his retreating figure. Virginia only felt increasingly exhausted. He had made her many promises, and she had always waited, but now, she no longer wanted to. After tidying everything up in the hospital room, she boarded the car home. No sooner had she stepped through the door than Virginia was struck by a sharp, resounding slap across her face before she could even see who it was. Slap. After the crisp sound of the palm striking flesh came Mrs. Brandon's voice dripping with disgust. Useless wretch, not only are you no help to Clyde on normal days, but you dare harm his student too. What evil intentions do you harbor? Must you bring chaos to our household before you're satisfied? I didn't. The searing pain on her face left her barely able to whimper these few words. Nothing at all. Clyde was absolutely right. You do nothing at home all day. Can't even conceive a child. Just keep suspecting him with your groundless doubts. And now you've gone as far as hurting others. You're utterly hopeless. Mrs. Brandon's shrill voice pierced straight into Virginia's heart. She looked up, opened her mouth. But in the end could only manage one question. He told you that. Don't tell me you actually think Clyde likes you. He's nothing but tired of you. After all, someone like you with nothing to offer. If you hadn't coincidentally saved my mother-in-law that one time, you'd never have had the chance to climb into our family in this lifetime. Mrs. Brandon's mouth kept opening and closing as she continued her shrill reprimands. But Virginia couldn't make out a single word anymore, so, in his heart, she was actually this despicable. Seeing Virginia remain silent, Mrs. Brandon felt slighted and snorted as she walked away. Fine, I barely touched you. Stop pretending. You've been getting increasingly unruly lately. I think you'd better skip the family banquet in a couple of days and reflect on your behavior at home. The sound of high heels gradually faded away. Virginia mechanically reached to pick up the phone she had dropped, as the screen lit up. 2 new messages popped up. Madam, here's my dietary restriction list that the professor personally compiled. I'll leave it to your care now, Tilda. I just have some allergies. Didn't expect the professor to be so concerned. Please don't misunderstand. Madam, he's just caring for his student. Virginia stared at Zoe's message, fingers trembling slightly. Before she could reply, her phone vibrated repeatedly with new notifications, in a group chat titled Zoe and her nanny entourage. Messages began flooding the screen. Sorry, madam, we were just too worried about senior sister. Madam is the most understanding person. She definitely won't blame us. She's not one of those aggressive shrewish women. Senior sister hasn't eaten anything since this morning. Madam, you're the best. Could you please send the food over earlier? You're always so free anyway. She scrolled through them one by one, suddenly finding it hard to breathe. Clyde's avatar lay silently in the group member list, never uttering a single word from beginning to end. Virginia put away her phone, walked silently into the study, printed out the divorce agreement she had drafted earlier, and signed her name without hesitation. By the time she finished preparing the medicinal meal, 3 hours had already passed. On the way to the hospital, her gaze unconsciously fell upon the stewed medicinal meal. Countless nights, she would stew this medicinal meal. Waiting for Clyde to come home. Back then, he never praised her, not even once. But now, he finally complimented her, saying she did well, yet it was so she could make it for another woman to drink. Just as she reached the hospital entrance, a hand abruptly grabbed Virginia, and a syrupy laugh echoed in her ear. Isn't this the mistress? Oh, your face is so red. Did the original wife finally find out and give you a good beating? Virginia looked at the strange men who had stopped her, surprised. She frowned and took a step back. What mistress? You've got the wrong person, one of them sneered, his gaze sweeping over her face. What are you pretending for? Everyone knows about Mr. Clyde and Zoe, don't they? You, a housewife who only finished junior high, fantasizing about an intellectual every day, being a mistress, interfering in other people's relationships. This has spread throughout the community. Exactly. Since you're already a mistress, you must be available to anyone, right? How much for a night? We brothers can afford it. Virginia turned pale, her fingers tightly gripping her bag strap, forcing herself to remain calm. Clyde and I are legally married. Do you need me to call him now so he can tell you himself? The group exchanged glances, their eyes flashing with a hint of contemptuous amusement. Go ahead, make the call. We'd love to see if Mr. Clyde actually answers your phone. Virginia trembled as she pulled out her phone and dialed Clyde's number. After a long wait, the call automatically disconnected. Unwilling to give up, she dialed again only to be met with the immediate notification that the phone was turned off. So this is how you prove you and Mr. Clyde are married. The few of them laughed and stepped forward to pull her. Can't keep up the act, can you? Those two are probably wrapped up in their lovey-dovey bliss. No time to bother with the likes of you. Let go of me. Virginia struggled, but her body, weakened by the recent miscarriage, was frail. She was dragged and pulled by several people towards the alley. She was shoved against the cold wall, and despair washed over her like a tide. Stop it! A sharp shout suddenly rang out. Virginia looked up to see teacher Mr. Black approaching quickly, followed by a tall man. At the sight of them, panic filled the eyes of those people as they released her and scattered in all directions. Virginia, are you all right? Mr. Black supported her swaying body, his brows tightly furrowed. Virginia's legs gave way and she nearly collapsed, but was steadied by the man beside her. Be careful, teacher. Thank you. Her voice trembled, her fingertips still shaking from the fear of her narrow escape. Mr. Black patted her shoulder reassuringly. Good thing I had a consultation nearby today and decided to drop by and see you. He then pointed to the man beside him. This is Barry, my student, and your senior brother, so to speak. He'll be joining you for further studies. Virginia forced a faint smile and nodded. Thank you, senior brother. Mr. Black noticed the lingering fear on her face and pulled a document from his bag to distract her. There's more good news. The drug research direction you previously worked on has shown significant therapeutic effects in our experiments. The approval process isn't complete yet, but I remembered Clyde's grandmother suffers from this condition. I specifically brought 1 dose for you, just in case. Virginia paused, her eyes growing warm under her teacher's expectant gaze. Her grandfather had been a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and close friends with her teacher. After her grandfather's accidental passing, her mother inherited his legacy, and it was through this that she saved Clyde's grandmother. And what about her? Clearly the most talented one. Yet all these years she had been lost in love affairs, disappointing them time and again. Fortunately, she's come to her senses now, better late than never. She solemnly took the documents, carefully examining the contents of the report, her expression gradually replaced by delight. "Thank you. I'll definitely guard the final checkpoint, Mr. Black smiled gently. The process for further studies will be quick too. I have patients to see today, so I must leave now. Take care by yourself." Watching the two leave, Virginia took a deep breath to suppress the stinging in her eyes, returned to the car to put the report and medicine inside, and then, carrying the packed food, walked towards Zoe's ward. Pushing open the door, the laughter and chatter in the ward abruptly ceased. Several students coldly glanced at her and spoke in a sarcastic tone. "Oh, so the professor's wife finally deigned to show up. Do you really think you're some kind of princess, making us wait so long on empty stomachs?" "Exactly, can't even handle a small task, and still have the nerve to put on airs. It's only because the professor is too good-tempered, spoiling you until you don't know your place. Do you really think you're worthy of him?" Virginia knew arguing with them was pointless. So she remained silent and was about to put down the lunchbox when the short-haired girl beside her suddenly snatched it from her hands. Her fingertips loosened, the lunchbox tilted, and the scalding soup instantly splattered onto Zoe's hand. "It hurts so much," Zoe gasped softly, her eyes instantly welling up. The bespectacled man shot up, his eyes filled with disgust. "Are you doing this on purpose? Zoe just recovered from an allergic reaction, and now you've scalded her. Are you really that jealous of her?" Virginia opened her mouth, but before she could utter a word in her defense, she was drowned out by the clamoring accusations of several people. "Get on your knees and apologize to your senior sister. Why are you spoiling her so much? Someone without an education truly is malicious. And clean up the food on the floor, don't leave a single crumb." Amidst the shoving, Virginia's waist hit the corner of the table. The sharp pain making her vision go black, a familiar cramping pain shot through her lower abdomen, and cold sweat instantly drenched her back. She gritted her teeth, trying to steady herself, but her vision grew increasingly blurry. Before consciousness faded, she heard Zoe's gentle voice. "Don't be like this. The teacher's wife didn't mean to." After that came endless darkness. Virginia woke up with a throat so dry it felt scorched by fire, struggling to prop herself up. She reached for the water glass on the bedside table, only to see a slender hand offering it to her first. Looking up, she met Clyde's calm gaze. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Virginia replied softly, about to ask him why he was there, when she saw him rub his temples, his voice full of helplessness. "Those students are still young and impulsive. Don't hold it against them. The experimental project is short-staffed, and they need to get back as soon as possible. Forget about taking care of Zoe. From now on, you just need to deliver the medicinal meals to the lab." As he was speaking, Clyde's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the caller ID and immediately answered. Virginia couldn't make out the specifics, only vaguely hearing Zoe's voice. Sensing that Clyde wanted to leave, she immediately reached out and grabbed him, pulling the divorce agreement from her bag and placing it under the discharge papers before handing it to him. "A family member needs to sign for discharge. Please sign here so you won't have to make another trip." It seemed the person on the other end of the phone was urging him intensely. As he didn't have time to read the contents of the paper, he quickly signed his name where Virginia indicated, then hurried out of the ward. Gazing in the direction he had left, Virginia simply clutched the divorce agreement tightly in her hand and let out a long sigh of relief. After 2 days of recuperation in the hospital, her body had barely recovered. She packed her belongings and prepared to be discharged. As soon as she stepped out of the hospital gate, a familiar black car pulled up in front of her, the window rolled down, and Grandma Brandon's kind face appeared. "Virginia, why are you still in the hospital?" Grandma Brandon was a little surprised. She then opened the car door wide and pulled her in. "Come on, the family dinner is about to start. You'll be late if you don't hurry." Virginia froze, about to explain that Mrs. Brandon had forbidden her from attending the family dinner, but Grandma Brandon had already begun to prattle on. "That boy, Clyde, when he gets busy, he forgets everything. He didn't even come to pick you up from the hospital. But don't worry, Grandma will teach him a lesson for you." Virginia tried to speak several times, but couldn't get a word in. It wasn't until the car stopped that Grandma Brandon finally ceased her chattering, and with a beaming smile, pulled her out of the car. However, as soon as she stepped into the courtyard of the old Brandon family residence, Virginia's steps faltered. Not far away, Clyde was standing with Mrs. Brandon, while Zoe, dressed in an elegant dress, was obediently holding Mrs. Brandon's arm and standing by her side. The three of them were chatting and laughing. As if they were the real family, Mrs. Brandon looked up and saw Virginia, her smile instantly turning cold. "Oh, isn't this our distinguished daughter-in-law? How kind of you to grace our humble family gathering with your presence." Virginia pressed her lips together, but before she could speak, Grandma Brandon frowned. "What kind of talk is that? Virginia has just been discharged from the hospital and isn't feeling well." "Unwell," Mrs. Brandon scoffed, her gaze dismissively sweeping over Virginia. "I think it's just being overly dramatic, isn't it? Zoe didn't complain once when she was hospitalized for allergies. But some people, oh well, a tiny ailment and they're stuck in the hospital, refusing to move." Virginia's fingertips trembled slightly, but she forced herself not to retort. She turned to look at Clyde. "Family dinner. Why is Miss Mo here?" Zoe was quick to offer an apologetic expression, saying softly, "Madam, please don't misunderstand. I just came to drop off some materials. My professor and I just came from the lab, and he didn't feel comfortable letting me go alone, so he was going to take me back. I didn't expect Auntie to be so enthusiastic after finding out and invite me over." "Zoe, you don't need to explain." Mrs. Brandon patted her hand, her tone affectionate. "I've always wanted to invite you over. After all, you are Clyde's most accomplished student, sensible and excellent. Some people, well, they can't even compare." Virginia stood rooted to the spot, her ears ringing. She opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by Clyde before she could say anything. "All right, everyone, let's go inside. The food's getting cold." As she helped Grandma Brandon into the house, she could still hear Zoe quietly telling Mrs. Brandon, "Auntie Brandon, please don't be angry. My teacher's wife just cares too much about him." Mrs. Brandon's taunts pierced her ears like sharp knives. "Care? Of course I care. She's shamelessly trying to marry into our family, afraid someone else will snatch her position as Mrs. Brandon." Chapter 6. At the dinner party, Virginia sat quietly to Clyde's left, while Mrs. Brandon enthusiastically pulled Zoe to sit on his right, constantly serving Zoe food and muttering, "Zoe is too thin, eat more." Virginia lowered her head, silently eating the food in her bowl, listening to the laughter and chatter of Mrs. Brandon and Zoe, occasionally interspersed with Clyde's gentle responses. She, on the other hand, seemed like the extra person at this family dinner. Suddenly, Clyde reached out and stopped Mrs. Brandon from serving Zoe a piece of lamb. "Mom, Zoe is allergic to lamb." He paused, then added, "She prefers seafood." Mrs. Brandon froze for a moment, then awkwardly withdrew her chopsticks and tossed the piece of lamb into Virginia's bowl, casting a condescending glance at her. "Then you eat it, don't waste it." Clyde didn't stop her, not even changing his expression. Virginia stared at the lamb in her bowl, forcing a faint smile. Slowly, she looked up and said, word by word, "I'm also allergic to lamb." Clyde was taken aback, seemingly not expecting her to say that. He then reached out and picked the piece of lamb from her bowl, asking with a hint of confusion, "Why didn't you tell me?" Virginia gave a bitter smile, offering no reply. She had actually said it, a long time ago, when they were first married, but obviously, he hadn't taken it to heart. Grandma Brandon looked at her somewhat dejected expression, opened her mouth as if to comfort her, but just as she stood up, her face suddenly turned pale, she clutched her chest, and her breathing became rapid. "Grandma." Everyone's faces changed drastically. Virginia reacted the fastest, quickly stood up, and said urgently, "There's medicine in the car, I'll go get it." Clyde instinctively handed her the keys, and Virginia turned and ran out. She rushed to the car, her fingers trembling as she opened the door, fumbling for the medicine bottle that was supposed to be in the glove compartment on the passenger side. However, the glove compartment, where the special medicine and reports should have been, was empty. Virginia's face instantly turned ashen. She frantically searched several more times in disbelief, but the medicine bottle seemed to have vanished into thin air, nowhere to be found. Her heart pounded like a drum, cold sweat dripping, as she stumbled back into the house. The moment she stepped into the living room, she froze in place. Grandma Brandon had regained her composure and was sitting on the sofa drinking water, while Zoe stood beside her, holding in her hand none other than the missing bottle of medicine. Mrs. Brandon beamed with joy, holding Zoe's hand and praising repeatedly, "Thanks to Zoe's medicine, the effect was immediate. As expected of a top student, what she develops is truly exceptional." Clyde also stood by, his gaze gently fixed on Zoe, his eyes filled with undisguised admiration. Virginia's breath hitched. Where did the medicine come from? Zoe's expression remained unchanged, her tone still gentle. "This is my latest developed medicine. What's wrong, Auntie? This is clearly my medicine." Virginia's voice rose a few octaves, her chest heaving violently. "I put it in the car, and I developed it. How did it become yours? Zoe's eyes instantly reddened, and she tugged at Clyde's sleeve, her voice choked with emotion. Teacher, this really is my research. Please, help me prove it. Clyde frowned slightly, his gaze at Virginia filled with disapproval. Zoe has indeed been researching this area for a while now. These past few days, she's been working late into the night every day. I've given her rides home, and I've seen her dedication with my own eyes. Virginia, you can't do this. Virginia looked at Clyde's face, filled with disappointment, and the way he protectively shielded Zoe behind him, and suddenly found it incredibly laughable. So, even if she told the truth, in his eyes, she was never worthy of belief. That night at the family dinner, Virginia ultimately explained nothing. Turning and leaving Brandon's house, in the following days, she didn't contact Clyde again, and he never proactively sought her out either. She had thought that with the divorce agreement signed, this marriage would soon end, but unexpectedly, what she received first was an overwhelming flood of unfamiliar text messages on her phone. Bitch, don't you ever look in the mirror and see what kind of person you are? Do you really think you're worthy of being with Mr. Clyde? I heard you became a housewife right after junior high. No wonder you're so vicious, even stealing Zoe's research. Virginia's fingertips went cold as she opened her social media, only to discover that Zoe had posted an update earlier today. Recently, I've experienced some unpleasant things. Someone maliciously spread rumors, harassed me, and even tried to steal my research. But it's okay, hard work won't go to waste. The potion has finally been successfully developed, and I hope it can help more people. The accompanying picture was a photo of a laboratory, with the faint silhouette of Clyde visible in the corner, and the top comment was a stream of insults directed at her. I heard the one harassing her is a middle school dropout, and she even tried to lay hands on Mr. Clyde. Anyone with eyes can see who Mr. Clyde is a better match with. I have that dead woman's contact info. Everyone go curse her out. She trembled, trying to turn off her phone, when suddenly a rapid series of footsteps sounded from outside the door. Bang! The door was forcefully pushed open. Mrs. Brandon stood at the entrance with a cold expression, followed by two servants carrying several suitcases. Pack your things and get out. Mrs. Brandon looked down at her, her voice icy. Our Brandon family has no room for someone as malicious as you. What do you mean? Don't play dumb. Mrs. Brandon sneered. It's all over the internet. Not only did you steal Zoe's research, but you also spread rumors about her relationship with Clyde. Now everyone knows what kind of person our Brandon family married. Virginia opened her mouth to explain, but Mrs. Brandon had already waved her hand impatiently. Get out of here, don't stand in my sight. The servants roughly stuffed her belongings into a suitcase and dragged her out of the main gate. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, and Virginia stood in the cold wind, her scattered clothes strewn beside her. For a moment, she had no idea where to go. The sky was darkening. She dragged her packed suitcase, walking aimlessly, and before she knew it, she had reached the vicinity of the hospital. Well, isn't this the mistress? Virginia looked up. Standing before her were the very men who had cornered her at the hospital entrance that day. Weren't you quite arrogant last time? You found two men to protect you, one of them spat, reaching out to grab her hair. You don't even spare old men, and you dare to refuse us. Virginia winced in pain and instinctively tried to struggle, only to be slapped hard to the ground by another person. Not only are you a homewrecker, but also an academic thief. You deserve this beating. Slaps and kicks rained down like a storm. She curled up, trying to protect her vital areas, but a brutal kick still landed on her abdomen, sending waves of darkness across her vision from the agony. Mr. Clyde also thinks you've gone too far this time, so we're here to teach you a lesson. As these words fell, Virginia summoned an unexpected burst of strength and violently pushed one of them down. Just as she tried to scramble to her feet and run, a brick struck her forehead with a heavy thud. Warm blood trickled down her cheek. Her vision blurred, and the panicked shouts of those men buzzed dully in her ears. Why is there so much blood? Could she die from this? Run! The sound of footsteps gradually faded into the distance. Virginia fumbled for her phone with difficulty, her hands trembling as she tapped the screen. She wanted to call Clyde and ask him if he had really arranged all of this, but as soon as she unlocked her phone, a live stream notification popped up. On the screen, Zoe was facing the camera, her eyes slightly red, and her voice soft. Everyone has really misunderstood. The person harassing me is not my teacher's wife. She has always been very kind to me, and my teacher's wife and teacher have a very good relationship. They got married because my teacher's wife's mother saved Grandma Brandon. She paused, a look of envy on her face. Such a relationship is truly precious. I only wish them well, so I hope everyone stops spreading rumors. Right now, I just want to focus on my studies and contribute to the nation's medical field in the future. At this, Zoe choked up for a moment. then suddenly flipped the live stream camera to face Clyde, who was standing nearby. She tugged at his sleeve. "Teacher, please explain it yourself. I'm afraid my teacher's wife will see it and misunderstand again." Clyde looked up at her words and actually spoke seriously. "Mo and I are just teacher and student. She is an excellent student." He didn't deny Zoe's words, nor did he defend her in the slightest. She felt her breath quicken slightly, and instinctively dialed Clyde's number. But on the live stream, Clyde merely glanced at his phone and hung up without hesitation. Numbly, she dialed his number again and again, only to be hung up on each time, finally receiving a cold reply. "Busy, wait a moment." Seeing these 4 words, Virginia completely lost the strength to keep dialing. At that moment, the phone vibrated with a new message notification. "Virginia, everything's ready. Where are you? I'll come pick you up." It was from her teacher. She curled up on the ground, blood streaming down her forehead, yet the pain in her heart cut deeper than any physical wound. With great difficulty, she replied with an address before closing her eyes, letting tears mingle with blood as they rolled down. She didn't know how much time had passed when hurried footsteps reached her ears. "Virginia." Her teacher's voice was filled with heartache, followed by a pair of strong arms gently lifting her up. Virginia opened her eyes to meet Barry's gaze filled with tender concern. "Professor, senior brother, I still have a few final matters to attend to. Please wait for me a little longer." For the first matter, she logged into her social media platform and with trembling yet resolute fingers, posted a statement. "I confirm that Clyde and I are legally married, but from today onward, I have severed all ties with him." For the second matter, she placed the signed divorce papers and miscarriage certificate into an envelope, handed it to the security guard at Brandon's mansion, requesting him to deliver it. Only after receiving the guard's promise did she finally leave. The third thing she did was throw away all the photos she once treasured, the gifts he had given her, and the presents she never got to give him, all into the trash, and deleted every contact related to Clyde. Finally, she went to the cemetery and took her mother's ashes with her. "Mom, come with me." After completing these tasks, she stood in the night breeze, turned back for one last look at the city that had trapped her for so many years, then turned away and boarded the car without a second glance. This time, she was truly never looking back. Clyde finished his experiment late in the evening. He rubbed his throbbing temples. As he passed the guardhouse, the duty guard called out, "Mr. Clyde, your wife came by this afternoon and left something for you." He paused, taking the craft paper envelope the guard handed him. It felt light and thin, seemingly just a few sheets of paper, probably nothing important. He casually tucked it into his briefcase. "Thank you." "Did she say anything else?" The doorman hesitated, then finally shook his head. "No, he just asked me to make sure it got into your hands. And your mother was here this afternoon too, in a hurry, and she didn't look too good." Clyde nodded slightly, indicating he understood, and didn't intend to press further. After all, his mother had always been harsh with Virginia, and he was used to it, simply assuming it was another trivial conflict. Pushing open the front door, the house was pitch black. He flicked the switch, and warm yellow light poured down, but it couldn't illuminate the empty living room. For the first time, when he returned home, there was no warm soup on the table, no busy figure in the kitchen, and even his slippers were neatly placed in the entryway, as if the house were empty. "Virginia," he called out, but received no answer. Bedroom, study, balcony, he checked each one, but couldn't even find a trace of her in her usual spot on the sofa. He frowned, suddenly remembering the dozen or so missed calls from that afternoon. Clyde then thought to call back, but only heard a cold automated message through the receiver. "The number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable." Sulking again, he murmured to himself, his fingertips tapping out a line of text on the screen before hitting send. "Don't overthink it. The experiment is almost over, and we can start planning that trip I promised you. Pack your bags when you get back, and we'll leave in a few days." But the message, once sent, vanished as if into the depths of the sea. He fiddled with his phone, a little unaccustomed. Usually, his messages were met with immediate replies, but today, it was as if they had sunk into the ocean. Clyde simply put down his phone and turned to enter the study. Data reports were spread across the desk, and just as he was about to sink into work, a sharp, stabbing pain suddenly shot through his stomach. Hiss! He hunched over, sweat instantly soaking through his shirt. The long dormant stomach ailment struck with a vengeance. Instinctively, he reached for the medicine box in the drawer, only to grasp at empty air. It dawned on him then, the medicine Virginia had prepared last time had long since run out. "Virginia, where's the medicine?" His weak voice echoed through the silent room, met with no response. The pain grew sharper, and he suddenly realized Virginia was not home today. Why isn't she back yet at this late hour? Clyde gripped the edge of the table, an inexplicable unease rising in his chest. Suddenly remembering the doorman's mention that Mrs. Brandon had visited today, he pulled out his phone and dialed Mrs. Brandon's number. "Mom, did you see Virginia today? Do you know where she is?" I was accompanying Grandma for her checkup. Since when do I have time to babysit her?" Mrs. Brandon snapped impatiently, unable to resist adding scornfully, "With that online scandal blowing up, does she even have the face to go shopping? I've told you countless times, a woman with no education or skills simply isn't worthy of you." "Mom," he interrupted, his voice still gentle but carrying a rare seriousness, "since Virginia married into our family, she's taken excellent care of the household. You shouldn't always find fault with her." Mrs. Brandon snorted coldly but ultimately said nothing more. After hanging up, Clyde felt slightly relieved. She was probably just sulking and went to the mall. She had always been like this before. Even when extremely upset, she would quietly deal with it alone, never thinking to bother him with her troubles. As he thought this, his heart suddenly softened, but the pain in his abdomen seemed to intensify. He forced himself to straighten up, grabbed his car keys, and rushed to the lab. He remembered that Virginia had some medicine stored there. When he arrived at the lab, cold white light emanated from within the glass door, suggesting someone was still there. Just as he was about to push the door open, he heard unbridled laughter and chatter from inside. "That day at the Japanese restaurant, did you guys smell perfume?" "Actually, I didn't smell anything at all." The boy's voice was full of playful mockery. "But I saw that senior sister didn't seem to like senior aunt, so I deliberately accused her of wearing perfume right away." "Who told her to occupy Mr. Clyde's wife's position?" The short-haired girl sneered. "Zoe and the professor are a perfect match, one an academic rising star, the other an industry titan. Unlike some people, what else can they do besides cooking and cleaning?" "Exactly, the professor clearly protects senior sister every time, but that woman just won't give up. We're just doing heaven's work." The sounds of laughter pierced my eardrums like steel needles. Clyde froze outside the door, his fingertips still hovering over the doorknob. His usually pale and gentle face was now filled with an icy coldness. Clyde stood at the laboratory door, his fingertips slightly cold. He suddenly remembered Virginia's pale face these past few days, her expressions of sadness and disappointment again and again, and even her weak defense at the Japanese restaurant. I never. But at the time, his mind was completely consumed by Zoe, who was on the verge of collapsing from her allergy, and he didn't even think to ask a single question. His heart felt as if an invisible hand had seized it, and his face grew increasingly grim. Finally, he pushed the door open and walked in. The laughter and chatter inside the lab instantly ceased. Several students exchanged glances. The bespectacled young man forced a strained smile, his voice trembling. "Professor, when did you arrive?" Clyde cast a faint glance at them, his voice still gentle but carrying a hint of chill. "While you were discussing the Japanese restaurant." Their faces instantly turned pale as they stammered and lowered their heads, not daring to meet his gaze. Just then, the lab door was pushed open again. Zoe walked in holding a stack of documents. Seeing Clyde, she froze momentarily before breaking into a delighted smile. "Professor, didn't you go home? Why are you back?" Her tone was affectionate, as if oblivious to the tense atmosphere in the room. She walked naturally to Clyde's side and said softly, "You didn't have to come back just to see me off. We're almost done organizing the data and can head back on our own later." The moment a few students saw Zoe, they felt as if they had been granted amnesty, and quickly chimed in. Yes, teacher, don't overthink it, we were just chatting casually. Please don't misunderstand." As they spoke, they quickly packed their belongings and, before Clyde could react, swiftly made excuses and slipped out of the laboratory. Zoe blinked, her face full of confusion as she looked at Clyde. "Teacher, what happened? Why are they in such a hurry?" Clyde was silent for a moment, then suddenly spoke. "Zoe, at the Japanese restaurant, was your allergy really caused by the perfume?" Zoe, her expression stiffened slightly but quickly returned to normal as she replied innocently, "Yes, what about it?" Clyde, a cold glint flashed in his eyes as he repeated the words spoken by the others moments ago. Zoe, upon hearing this, she immediately put on a wounded expression, her eyes slightly reddening. "Professor, I was having an allergic reaction at the time. I was completely lightheaded and had no idea what was happening. They were probably just overly concerned about me, which made them act so emotional. They didn't mean any harm." She paused, then added, "Besides, your wife wasn't actually hurt. They were probably just venting earlier, just saying a few things in the heat of the moment." Clyde frowned. These students were indeed well-behaved and diligent in his presence on weekdays, and Zoe was his star pupil, whom he had personally mentored, and who was usually very hardworking and assiduous. He ultimately decided not to pursue the matter further, merely stating indifferently, "Be mindful of your boundaries from now on." "Zoe, seeing his attitude soften. Immediately smiled and quickly changed the subject. "Oh, by the way, Professor, I have some good news to tell you. The drug I developed earlier has received industry recognition and brought new sponsorship to the lab." Her voice was joyful, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "But the sponsor requires me to attend a dinner party, and I've never been to such an event before. I'm afraid I won't do well," seeing Clyde's eyes also filled with surprise. She boldly reached out and gently tugged at his sleeve, winking playfully. "Teacher, could you accompany me? If I embarrass myself, it won't just be my problem, it'll also tarnish your reputation." Clyde instinctively pulled his sleeve from her grasp, stepping back 2 paces, his tone somewhat distant. "Virginia has been very unhappy lately because of your actions. Don't do something like that again." Zoe's expression froze for a moment, but she quickly put on a docile smile. "I understand. Teacher." Clyde paused, then added, "I'll accompany you to the dinner party. This is a great opportunity, so make the most of it." Zoe's eyes lit up, and she nodded repeatedly. "Thank you, teacher. I won't let you down. Will you drive me later?" "Teacher, I'll be alone tonight. It's not convenient. From now on, you can take a taxi home by yourself." Clyde casually dropped the remark without further explanation, turned, and walked towards the medicine cabinet to retrieve the stomach medicine Virginia had prepared earlier. Clutching the medicine bottle in his palm, he suddenly remembered something, pulled out his phone, and glanced at it. Still no reply. He frowned, a flicker of inexplicable irritation rising within him, but it was quickly suppressed. She was probably just sulking. In a couple of days, a little coaxing would set things right. Thinking this, he slipped the medicine bottle into his pocket and left the laboratory. The lights at the dinner party on the second night were dazzling, and amidst the clinking of glasses, Clyde seemed somewhat distracted. He glanced down at his wristwatch. It was already 9:30, and Virginia still hadn't come home, nor had she replied to his messages. Where could she possibly go by herself? This thought lingered in his mind. Virginia almost completely cut off all social contact after marrying him. Aside from occasional trips to the supermarket for groceries, she hardly ever went out alone. Her disappearance since yesterday was truly out of character. "Teacher." Zoe's voice pulled him back to reality. She had, at some point, come to stand beside him, holding a glass of champagne, her smile sweet. "The sponsors would like to speak with you. Would you like to go say hello?" Clyde nodded slightly and followed her towards the crowd. Zoe stayed close to him the whole way, occasionally using the crowded streets as an excuse to lightly brush his arm or lean in to whisper in his ear, her demeanor intimate. He was distracted and didn't notice the ambiguous glances from those around them, nor did he spot the flicker of triumph in Zoe's eyes. Soon, several reporters surrounded them, microphones pointed directly at Zoe. "Miss Mo, we hear that the pharmaceutical agent recognized by the industry this time is the result of your independent research. Could you share some insights from the development process?" Zoe's cheeks flushed slightly, and she shyly glanced at Clyde. "Actually, I owe all of this to my teacher. If it weren't for his meticulous guidance, I wouldn't have achieved what I have today." The reporters immediately perked up, pressing on. "It seems Mr. Clyde is exceptionally attentive to you. What's your usual dynamic like in the lab?" Zoe smiled, her lips pressed together, her tone vague. "My professor has always been very caring towards me, both academically and personally." "Oh, don't go making assumptions." She coyly waved her hand in playful protest, yet deliberately left room for suggestive interpretation. Clyde frowned upon hearing this and was about to clarify when another reporter suddenly posed a professional question. "Miss Mo, could you elaborate on the core components of this medication and its mechanism of action? It said that its efficacy in alleviating specific conditions far surpasses existing drugs. How was this achieved? As the lead researcher, what was your approach to this study?" The air suddenly grew tense for a moment. Zoe's smile froze on her face, her fingers unconsciously clutching her skirt. She opened her mouth, but only managed to stammer out a few disjointed technical terms, her words illogical and incoherent. The reporters exchanged glances, their eyes filled with doubt. Clyde glanced sideways at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. How could a developer not answer such a basic question? Noticing his gaze, Zoe's face grew even paler. She suddenly clutched her forehead and leaned weakly against him. "Teacher, I'm feeling a bit unwell. I might be too nervous. Could I go to the lounge to rest for a bit?" Clyde steadied her, nodding politely to the reporters. "I apologize. She needs to rest. Subsequent questions can be answered by the lab collectively." With that, he motioned for a waiter to take Zoe to the lounge. While he remained in place, his brow furrowed. After the banquet, Clyde stopped Zoe in the hotel corridor as she was about to leave. "Zoe, why couldn't you answer that question just now?" His tone was still gentle, but this time his gaze was scrutinizing. Zoe's eyes flickered, and she forced a smile. Teacher, I was just too nervous and suddenly felt dizzy, so I didn't react in time. Dizziness affects your memory of research content. Clyde looked at her, a hint of coldness in his voice. You even wrote a professional academic paper for me on the ingredients and mechanism of action of this drug. How can you not answer such a simple question now? Zoe bit her lip, and her eyes suddenly reddened. Teacher, are you doubting me? You saw how many nights I stayed up for this project, didn't you? I'm not doubting you, seeing the tears in Zoe's eyes. Clyde rubbed his temples. I just hope you answer truthfully. Zoe lowered her head, her voice choked. I was just too nervous. Those reporters were so aggressive. My mind went blank for a moment. Clyde watched her silently, suddenly feeling that the student before him was a stranger. The diligent and passionate girl who used to be so enthusiastic about research now couldn't even articulate the core content of her own study. Something's wrong. He closed his eyes, suppressing the surging doubts in his heart, and finally just said, It's getting late. You should go back and rest. Zoe left in a hurry, nodding as if granted amnesty. Clyde stood still in silence for a long while before finally taking out his phone to make a call. Please retrieve the surveillance footage from the lab for the past few days, especially the parts involving Zoe. Clyde stood in the lab's surveillance room, the images on the screen sending a chill through his fingertips. In the scene, whenever he left, Zoe would completely change from her diligent demeanor in front of him, wandering around and chatting. In the scene, she was leaning lazily against the lab bench, twirling a pen in her hand, while several of his students gathered around her, laughing and chatting. Mr. Clyde isn't here, so it's fine if you slack off a bit, Zoe said with a smile. Anyway, for data, just fill it in casually, he won't be staring at it every day. The bespectacled boy scratched his head, a bit hesitant. But, what if we get caught? What's there to be afraid of? Zoe huffed softly. If you don't say anything and I don't say anything, no one will ever know. She paused, then adopted a troubled expression. There are some things I don't know if I should say. Our professor's wife, I think she dropped out of junior high because she was messing around with other guys. She got pregnant back then and manipulated the professor into marrying her. In reality, the professor was just forced into it and didn't love her at all. Don't go spreading what I'm telling you. Oh, well, after all, the professor told me all this himself, when he was at my place the other night. The short-haired girl immediately crowded around, flattering her. I knew the professor must like you, senior sister. He's always been the most special to you, senior sister. Just tell us how far you two have progressed. As for Virginia, I've always said she's not worthy of the professor at all. She's always so suspicious and constantly comes to the lab to bother us. Zoe smiled contentedly, a shy expression surfacing on her face. Oh, it's nothing, really. It's just that the professor has stayed at my place a few times. He and Virginia have no feelings for each other, so they should be getting divorced soon, right? Anyway, don't worry, if you help me, I'll naturally help you too, just fudge the experimental data a bit. The professor trusts me so much, he won't suspect anything. Clyde watched the monitor silently, his chest feeling as if it were being tightly squeezed by something. Such scenes had played out repeatedly in the lab, with Zoe always effortlessly creating an intimate atmosphere between them with just a few words, while simultaneously belittling Virginia to no end. Could someone who never took experiments or academics seriously truly have developed that drug on their own during their free time? In a flash of lightning, he suddenly remembered Virginia's words, I developed that drug, and the sorrow in her eyes when she learned he drove Zoe home every day. Finally realizing something, Clyde's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled up the car's surveillance footage. On the screen, Zoe, while he wasn't paying attention, secretly opened the glove compartment on the passenger side, took out the medicine bottle and research report from inside, and stuffed them into her bag. Her movements were practiced, clearly not the first time she had done something like this. Clyde's breath hitched, his heart feeling as if it had been struck hard by a heavy hammer. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed Virginia's number again. The number you have dialed cannot be reached at this time. But as the cold automated voice rang out repeatedly, he finally realized something was wrong. Looking at the messages that had vanished without a trace, his face darkened. He then opened a social media app and sent her a message. Virginia, where are you? Let's talk. After the message was sent, a red exclamation mark popped up next to it. Message sent, but rejected by the recipient. He had been blacklisted. Clyde stood frozen, an unprecedented panic welling up inside him. How could this be? No matter how angry Virginia had been with him before, she had never blocked his contact. He had to find out exactly when Virginia left home and where she had gone. Clyde hurried home and stood before the surveillance screen, pulling up the home security footage. His fingers hovered trembling over the keyboard before he finally adjusted the surveillance time to the day Virginia had left. What appeared on the screen next chilled him to the bone. Mrs. Brandon stood at the entrance hall, while two maids behind her were roughly stuffing Virginia's clothes into a suitcase. "Pack your things and get out," Mrs. Brandon's shrill voice echoed through the room. "Our Brandon family has no place for someone as malicious as you." More insults and curses followed. Virginia stood frozen, her face pale to the point of transparency. She opened her mouth but ultimately said nothing, silently watching as the maids haphazardly threw her belongings into the suitcase. Clyde's breathing grew increasingly rapid, his expression darkening. He quickly scrolled through more surveillance footage, watching as additional scenes unfolded before his eyes. Mrs. Brandon poured scalding tea on Virginia's hand, and Virginia silently wiped it away, biting her lip. Mrs. Brandon affectionately held Zoe's hand in front of Virginia, smiling and saying, "Now this is the daughter-in-law I envisioned," and even recently, Virginia, caught off guard, opened the door only to be mercilessly slapped by Mrs. Brandon, and the humiliation and verbal abuse followed Virginia constantly, at every moment. Even though he clearly had feelings for Virginia and had privately told Mrs. Brandon many times to treat Virginia better, in Mrs. Brandon's words, it all turned into him despising Virginia and being eager to divorce her as soon as possible. Clyde suddenly stood up, his vision darkening in waves. He had never once spoken those belittling words about Virginia, not even once. In truth, before this, his mother would deliberately criticize Virginia in front of him. But he always thought it was just minor quarrels. Worse, he feared that openly taking sides would further sour the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, so he only softly comforted Virginia afterward. He thought that would be enough, that Virginia would understand his difficulties. But now he realized how much Virginia had suffered because of his inaction. With trembling hands, Clyde pulled out his phone and dialed his mother directly. As soon as the call connected, he heard Mrs. Brandon's impatient voice. "What is it at this late hour, Mom?" For the first time, Clyde's voice trembled slightly. "You kicked Virginia out of the house." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Mrs. Brandon responded with righteous indignation. "So what if I did? That kind of woman should have been thrown out long ago. And have you seen how awful people are talking about her online, after what she's done? Doesn't she deserve to be kicked out? You hit her. What's wrong with hitting her?" Mrs. Brandon's voice suddenly rose sharply. "She caused Zoe's allergic reaction and even stole Zoe's research. Hitting her was going easy on her, Clyde. I'm doing this for your own good. That kind of woman isn't worthy of you. You need to divorce her immediately." Clyde closed his eyes briefly, his voice rising involuntarily. "She has never harmed Zoe, and that medicine, it was originally her creation. What nonsense are you spouting?" Mrs. Brandon sneered coldly, her tone dripping with distrust. "Zoe is so outstanding, how could she possibly lie? That woman, with her mediocre education, certainly knows how to seduce men. How many times have you argued with me for her sake? She is my wife. How could you treat Virginia like that? And how could you distrust her because of an outsider?" The other end of the phone fell silent abruptly. After a long pause, Mrs. Brandon finally spoke icily. "So what? She never should have married into our family. Clyde, this is the last time I'll say it, you must divorce her." Clyde didn't answer. He just hung up the phone. He stood rooted to the spot, suddenly feeling incredibly weary. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze fell upon his briefcase. He suddenly remembered the document the doorman had given him. He hadn't paid it any mind at the time, simply stuffing it into his bag without even bothering to look at it. It must be Virginia who couldn't bear to leave him, leaving him a clue. After all, Virginia loved him so much. How could she truly leave? Clyde's fingers trembled as he pulled out the document. When he opened it, he froze, as if struck by lightning. Inside were only a few thin pages. One was a divorce agreement, and the other was a hospital diagnostic report, clearly stating threatened miscarriage and embryonic demise. Clyde's face was ashen as he flipped through them in disbelief. On the divorce agreement, both his and Virginia's names were prominently signed. When did he sign it? And the miscarriage? Virginia was pregnant. Why didn't she tell him? His gaze fell upon the date on the diagnostic report, and he stumbled, nearly falling. So that day, Virginia came to the lab. Was she trying to tell him the good news about her pregnancy? And what did he let her see? He was helping Zoe wash her underwear, and later, he even blamed her because of Zoe's allergies. He didn't even know she had miscarried, his mind completely occupied by experiments and the allergic Zoe. At that time, Virginia was alone in the hospital losing their child. Clyde sat back down in front of the computer in his study, the cold glow of the screen reflecting off his pale face. His phone chimed repeatedly with message after message. The private investigator he'd hired was sending him the investigation results. He didn't have the courage to check, only mechanically typed on the keyboard, pulling up all the surveillance records from the lab for the past 6 months. Frame after frame flashed by, Zoe's figure appearing frequently. She always dutifully presented experimental data to him, her eyes focused and serious, but as soon as he turned away, she would immediately relax, either lazily scrolling on her phone or chatting idly with other students, and 9 out of 10 times, their conversations were subtly or overtly disparaging towards Virginia. Those ambiguous words made other students see Virginia as a dirty woman with a messy private life who wouldn't let go, and him as Zoe's possession. Clyde's fingertips trembled slightly, the tea long since cold, though he didn't notice. He continued to scroll through the surveillance footage, suddenly stopping on a particular day's recording several unfamiliar men loitering outside the lab, whistling at Zoe and speaking to her flippantly. Then, his figure appeared, shielding Zoe behind him. It was also from that day forward that he began personally escorting Zoe home every day, worried she might encounter such danger again. But now, he finally took a deep breath and clicked open the detective's investigation results. The screen flickered slightly, then clearly showed those same hoodlums meeting with Zoe around the corner. She smiled as she pulled several bills from her wallet and handed them over, even affectionately patting one of them on the shoulder. "Make it convincing, don't blow the act." Zoe's voice came through the surveillance footage. "Remember, come back tomorrow. When the job's done, your pay doubles. Also, help me teach someone a lesson. As for the money, we can negotiate." The next video immediately popped up, showing Virginia being cornered by those men in a dim alley. They yanked her hair while hurling obscenities like homewrecker and academic thief. One of the men even pulled out his phone and started filming her, saying he wanted to let the whole internet see what happens to a slut. The surveillance feed suddenly cut out. The last image was of Virginia falling to the ground, blood streaming from her forehead, while the person helping her only showed a sleeve of a white lab coat, their face obscured. There were 2 separate scenes just of her being bullied by hoodlums. More images surged forth like a tide. In the hospital, Zoe was scalded by hot soup, and the look in his eyes as he gazed at Virginia was full of mockery, only to feign panic the next second. His students surrounded Virginia, who had just finished delivering food, forcing her to kneel and apologize to Zoe, and Virginia, with no way to defend herself, was pushed and shoved until she fell, even losing consciousness. And that day, his students told him that Virginia had intentionally scalded Zoe after delivering the food, and then pretended to faint to escape responsibility. What truly tore at his heart was seeing in the surveillance footage how he had consistently ignored Virginia's grievances, even choosing to believe Zoe time and again. In those moments when Virginia needed him most, he always stood on the opposite side. Every frame was like a dull knife, slowly flaying his heart. As dawn broke, Clyde finally finished organizing all the evidence. He opened his computer and categorized the surveillance videos, audio recordings, and evidence of falsified experimental data, bundling them into a complete folder. Finally, he logged into a social media account he hadn't used in a long time and sent the file directly. Complete evidence chain regarding Zoe's academic misconduct and false accusations against my wife, Virginia. His hand hovered for a long time, but eventually, he pressed the send button. After posting that update, he leaned back in his chair, suddenly feeling incredibly weary. He picked up the document from the table again, his fingers unconsciously tracing Virginia's signature on the divorce agreement. The girl who once loved to meticulously imitate his handwriting, now even her signature had become so resolute. The evidence is out in the open, yet Virginia's whereabouts remain a mystery. She left with nothing, not even her phone, and cancelled her number. Even the private detective admitted helplessly that her tracks had been deliberately erased, making it impossible to find her. She was like a gust of wind, completely vanishing from his world without a trace. Clyde closed his eyes, feeling the bitterness in his throat, and murmured softly, "Virginia, where on earth are you?" At that moment, Virginia was sitting by the car window, watching the scenery flash by. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warming the back of her hand. The car drove smoothly on the highway. Mr. Black sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at her, his eyes full of concern. "Virginia, are you really okay? Do you want to rest for a few more days?" Virginia gently shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Teacher, I'm much better. I don't want to waste any more time." From the back seat, Barry handed her a bottle of warm water, his voice low and gentle. "Did you bring your medicine? Let me know if you feel unwell during the trip." She took the water, looked up to meet Barry's gaze, and whispered her thanks. "Thank you, Senior, I've brought everything." Barry gave a slight nod and said no more, though his eyes lingered on her pale face for a moment before quietly looking away. The dormitory for the advanced training class was a quiet little building, surrounded by lush greenery in a serene environment. Mr. Black had already arranged everything for her, even changing the bedsheets and duvet to her favorite light blue. This place is close to the classroom, and there's a medicinal garden downstairs, which will be convenient for your research, Mr. Black said, patting her shoulder with a relieved tone. Get some good rest. Tomorrow I'll take you to meet your classmates. Virginia nodded, her eyes welling up. Once upon a time, in order to take care of Clyde's daily needs, she had gradually forgotten her own preferences. Now, someone remembered what she liked and even prepared everything for her in advance. This cherished feeling, both strange and warm. The next morning, Virginia changed into a simple cotton and linen dress, loosely tied up her long hair, and followed Mr. Black into the classroom of the advanced training class. The noisy chatter in the classroom quieted for a moment as she stepped in, and a dozen pairs of eyes looked at her curiously. Mr. Black smiled and introduced, "This is Virginia, my student. She will be studying with all of you from now on." After a brief silence, a bespectacled young man was the first to speak. "I heard you were personally recommended by Mr. Black, so you must be quite impressive, right?" There was no mockery in his tone, only pure curiosity. Virginia pursed her lips and was about to respond when another girl interjected with a smile. "Virginia, could I borrow your annotated copy of Compendium of Materia Medica? Mr. Black mentioned it last time, saying your insights were quite unique." She paused, surprised that Mr. Black would proudly boast about such small matters to others. A warm feeling rose in her chest as she nodded in agreement. "Of course you can." People swarmed around her, introducing themselves in cheerful tones, until the class began and everyone reluctantly moved away from Virginia's spot. During the afternoon's practical session, the teacher had everyone practice acupuncture in groups. Just as Virginia picked up a silver needle, she heard a muffled groan of pain from behind her. She turned to see a male classmate clutching his stomach, his face pale, fine beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. "What's wrong?" she asked, hurrying over. "It's an old problem, stomach cramps." The boy gritted his teeth, his voice trembling. Virginia didn't hesitate. She drew several slender silver needles from her acupuncture case and said softly, "Let me help relieve it for you." "Okay." The boy nodded with difficulty. Her fingertips were steady and gentle as the silver needles precisely pierced the acupoints. Her movements flowed effortlessly without the slightest hesitation. The surroundings gradually quieted as everyone held their breath watching her technique. Within minutes, the boy's brow gradually unfurled, and his breathing steadied. He incredulously touched his stomach, exclaiming in surprise, "It doesn't hurt, it really doesn't hurt anymore." A chorus of gasps immediately filled the classroom. "This is incredible. I didn't even see her needle technique just now." "Virginia, who did you learn from? Your technique is even more skilled than my teacher's." Virginia put away her silver needles and smiled faintly. "I learned from my grandfather and mother. They were traditional Chinese medicine practitioners during their lifetime." No sooner had she spoken than a glass of warm water was handed to her. She looked up, meeting Barry's deep gaze. "Your talent should have been recognized long ago," he murmured, a hint of imperceptible tenderness in his voice. Virginia took the glass, her fingertips trembling slightly. The morning sun streamed through the glass window of the herb storage room. Virginia squatted in front of the herb cabinet. Gently picking up a dried slice of Angelica sinensis with her fingertips, she brought it close to her nose, sniffed it, and then wrote in her notebook, "The aroma is mellow and slightly bitter. The cross-section is oily, a top-grade specimen." She had been immersed here for a whole week, from dawn till dusk, meticulously studying every single herb in the medicinal herb library. 3 thick notebooks were densely filled with notes on the characteristics, efficacies, and identification points of the medicinal herbs. Footsteps sounded behind her. Barry walked in, carrying a stack of modern medical literature, and gently placed it on the table beside her. "The theoretical part you mentioned wanting to supplement last time, I went to the library and found it for you." He pointed to the top 2 books. "I also annotated my own insights. You can take a look." Virginia looked up and saw faint dark circles under his eyes. Clearly from staying up late to organize things, her heart warmed, and just as she was about to thank him, Barry had already turned to take a jar of medicinal herbs from the shelf, naturally continuing her previous research. "Actually, this batch of herbs was stir-fried a bit too much. The bitterness is too strong. If used in medicine, it might affect the balance of the formula." She leaned in to look, and indeed saw that the herbs at his fingertips were darker in color. Their heads were almost touching, and the scent of the herbs mixed with the faint sandalwood fragrance on him, inexplicably bringing a sense of peace. "Brother, how do you even know this?" she couldn't help but ask. Barry lowered his gaze to her, a slight smile playing on his lips. "My grandfather was a herbalist. The herb identification exam is in a few days. You don't need to be so nervous. You can always come and ask me if you have any questions." The person before her had a gentle expression, and her heart suddenly softened. She nodded heavily. Afterward, she immersed herself in the herb library as usual, and Barry always stayed by her side, bringing her various related books. On the day of the herb identification exam, Virginia suppressed the nervousness in her heart and looked up at the supervising professor. The old professor brought out 10 sealed porcelain jars, his voice hoarse. The herbs inside are similar in pairs. You have half an hour to write down their differences. The students nervously passed around the porcelain jars, some picking them up and comparing them repeatedly, sweat beading on their foreheads. The texture, the smell, they're exactly the same. Virginia opened the porcelain jars one by one, her fingertips barely touching the medicinal herbs when her expression turned grave. These two, she murmured unconsciously, one has a coarser texture at the cross-section, while the other shows a slight oily sheen. She brought the herbs closer to her nose, closed her eyes for a delicate sniff, then quickly jotted down the differences and names on paper with slightly brightened eyes. The elderly professor paced behind her, his clouded eyes narrowing slightly. When Virginia accurately listed the distinct differences between 10 sets of medicinal herbs, the white-haired old man suddenly tapped his smoking pipe against her desk. "Girl, come here." Under the astonished gazes of the entire class, she followed the professor out of the examination hall. "You've got the soul of an old Chinese medicine practitioner," the old man snorted, though his eyes held complex, intense emotions. "Students these days only know how to use machines to test components. They can't even recognize the herbs properly. I thought anyone who could distinguish 3 or 4 types would be considered talented, but now it seems, your answers were flawless. There's no need to stay in the exam hall any longer, go and rest." She saw the admiration in the professor's eyes, and her own eyes welled up slightly. Back at Brandon's house, no matter how many prescriptions she memorized, all she ever got was, "What does a housewife know?" But now, for the first time, her talent was being acknowledged and cherished in such a way. 3 years was enough time for a seed to grow into a mighty tree. Virginia stood by the research lab window, gazing out at the lush green herb garden. Sunlight streamed through the glass, casting dappled shadows on the journal in her hands. In just 3 short years, she had grown at an incredible pace, even publishing several constructive papers in various journals during that time. "Look at this." Barry pushed the door open and placed a document in front of her, his eyes beaming with joy. "The clinical approval has come through. Our emergency preparation can now enter the final trial phase." She opened the document, her fingertips gently tracing the bright red stamp. 3 years ago, she had been so lost in the lab, and now, she had actually transformed her mother's incomplete prescription into a preparation that could benefit more people. "Senior brother, thank you." She looked up, meeting Barry's gentle gaze. Over the past 3 years, from identifying medicinal materials to writing papers, from designing experiments to applying for clinical trials, he had always stood by her side. Steadfastly accompanying her, Barry gently shook his head. "It's your own hard work." He paused, then took a thermal container from his briefcase. "Eat first. We still need to go to the pharmaceutical factory this afternoon." Inside the thermal container were her favorite stir-fried seasonal vegetables and yam and pork rib soup. As for anything that might cause her allergies, it never appeared before her eyes, because 3 years ago, during a dinner, she casually mentioned being allergic to lamb, and Barry never let her see such food on the table again. After graduating from the advanced training class, she joined Mr. Black's Research Institute, where her daily work was busy and fulfilling. That evening, Virginia was organizing clinical data when her phone suddenly vibrated. "Virginia." Mr. Black's hearty laughter came from the other end of the line. "Guess who recommended you to be a keynote speaker at the International Forum on Traditional Chinese Medicine?" Her fingers tightened slightly around her phone. 3 years ago, she would get nervous even speaking in group discussions. Now, she was actually going to stand on the podium of an international forum. "Don't worry," Barry said, appearing behind her at some point and patting her back reassuringly. "I've double-checked all the data. It's solid." She turned to look at him, noticing he held the speech outline she had prepared earlier, now densely covered with annotations. "Senior Barry, you even prepared this." Barry cleared his throat, his ear tips slightly red. "Just happened to." On the eve of the competition, Virginia went to the cemetery where her mother was buried. She placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums in front of her mother's tombstone, gently wiping away the dust. "Mom, I did it," she whispered, fighting back tears. "The recipe you left behind can really help a lot of people now." A gentle breeze swept by, carrying the faint fragrance of the distant herb garden. She remembered her childhood, when her grandfather would always teach her about medicinal herbs while pounding them, and her mother would watch gently from the side. At that time, her mother told her, "Virginia, a healer's heart is benevolent. Medicine knows no high or low. Good medicine is that which can cure illness. A faint sound of footsteps came from behind her. Barry stood 3 steps away, holding another bouquet of white chrysanthemums, quietly waiting for her to finish speaking. For the past 3 years, every time she came to visit her mother, he would keep his distance like this, giving her space to be alone, yet not leaving her to face her grief by herself. Senior brother, she stood up, took the bouquet, and looked directly at him, suddenly asking, "Why do you always come with me?" Barry's gaze fell on the tombstone. My grandfather used to say that only those who remember the deceased truly understand how to cherish the living. Virginia's heart warmed, and she shyly averted her gaze. On the way back, the setting sun stretched their shadows long. Virginia suddenly realized that, without knowing when, she had grown accustomed to having such a presence by her side, someone who would silently hand her a cup of ginseng tea when she stayed up late. Check all her materials before a presentation, and prepare a perfectly fitting bouquet of white chrysanthemums for Qingming Festival, next week's keynote speech. She leaned slightly closer to Barry. "Brother, come with me." Barry paused, a flicker of light in his eyes. Okay, a simple answer. Yet it sent a wave of warmth through Virginia's heart. 3 years ago, she was a scarred mess, but now, in this quiet and steadfast companionship, she had finally found the strength to move forward. Virginia's speech had reached its climax. The entire hall was silent, all eyes fixed on this rising star. She nodded slightly, the nervousness she had felt about giving the speech now completely gone, replaced by a face full of confidence. As her gaze swept across the hall, Virginia suddenly caught sight of a familiar figure in the shadows of the last row. Clyde. He was wearing a dark grey suit, his hands clasped tightly on his knees, staring at her with red-rimmed eyes. 3 years later, he was much thinner, his jawline sharper, and his brow etched with a hint of weariness. Virginia's fingertips paused lightly on the podium, then she continued her speech as if nothing had happened. After the speech, reporters swarmed forward. "Dr. Virginia, as a rising star in traditional Chinese medicine, what are your suggestions for the modernization of traditional medicine? May I ask what your and researcher Chen's next research direction will be?" Virginia smiled as she answered each question, but out of the corner of her eye, she saw Clyde struggling to make his way through the crowd towards her. His lips moved slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but he was blocked by the constant stream of reporters. "Excuse me." Barry had appeared beside her at some point, his arm loosely circling her back, creating a safe space for her. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and Virginia nodded. The two of them moved in unison towards the exit. "Virginia." Clyde finally pushed his way closer, reaching out to grab her, but was blocked by Barry, who stepped in front of him. "She doesn't want to see you right now." Barry remained expressionless, but his gaze was icy as he looked at him. Clyde's hand froze mid-air, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I just wanted to apologize." His gaze traveled over Barry's shoulder, hungrily watching Virginia. She was wearing a moon-white chipao today. Her hair tied in a simple bun, more radiant than he remembered. Those eyes that had once always followed him now refused to even glance his way. Virginia lowered her head to organize the documents and said softly to Barry, "Let's go to that vegetarian restaurant we talked about last time. I heard their mushroom soup is very fresh." She didn't glance at Clyde the entire time, as if he were just an insignificant stranger. Barry immediately nodded, carefully shielding her, and gave a meaningful look to the security guard not far away. Seeing the guard restrain Clyde, he then took Virginia's hand and left without looking back. In the private room of the vegetarian restaurant, steam rose gently from the clay pot. Barry handed her the sterilized bowls and chopsticks. "He followed us here and is now waiting at the entrance." Virginia picked up a slice of mushroom and placed it in his bowl, her expression calm. "Try this, senior brother, it's been stewed to perfection." Outside the window, rain had begun to fall unnoticed, droplets meandering down the glass pane. Barry didn't mention Clyde again, instead talking about the medicinal herb base they'd visit tomorrow. But as he stood to serve soup, his peripheral vision caught the figure still stubbornly standing in the rain outside the hotel in trance. "Should I send him an umbrella?" he finally asked. Virginia shook her head, scooping a spoonful of mushroom soup. The delicious taste spread across her tongue. And she suddenly remembered many years ago, she too had stood in the rain waiting for Clyde to come home, until she was soaked through. When he returned, he merely frowned. "Why didn't you wait inside?" "Some people," she paused, putting down her spoon, "always need to get rained on to know the importance of an umbrella." Barry watched her quietly, saying nothing more, simply handing her a warm towel. The rain grew heavier. Clyde stood in the curtain of rain outside the hotel entrance. Water trickling from his hairline down his collar. Through the downpour, he could just make out 2 figures sitting opposite each other in the warmly lit private room on the 2nd floor. 3 years ago, He personally submitted the surveillance video and evidence to the school, and Zoe was expelled. He publicly clarified all the rumors, even arguing with his mother, but it was all too late. By the time he finally sorted everything out to find her, Virginia had already vanished without a trace. It wasn't until he saw her name on the summit list and investigated that he learned she had participated in a secret advanced study program 3 years ago, organized by the state. Once inside, all contact with the outside world was cut off, which explained why he couldn't find any trace of her no matter what. The rain blurred his vision, and he thought again of the confident and composed Virginia on stage just now, so different from the girl who used to quietly stand behind him. The hotel doorman hesitated, offering an umbrella. "Sir, would you like?" Clyde shook his head and turned to walk into the rain. The curtains on the second floor swayed gently. Virginia stood by the window, watching the figure gradually disappear into the rain. "Should we go after him?" Barry asked from behind her. She drew the curtains and shook her head. "We have an early flight to catch tomorrow." Chapter 18. Clyde rented an apartment across from the Virginia Research Institute. Every morning, he would stand downstairs holding carefully prepared breakfast, only to have the steaming porridge returned untouched by the security guards. The apology letters he wrote filled the drawer of the guardroom, until one day he saw Virginia walk past and toss them into the trash without even a glance. On a rainy night, Virginia worked overtime until dawn once again. Rubbing her throbbing temples, she pushed open the institute's door, greeted by cold wind carrying strands of rain. In the distance, a figure approached quickly under an umbrella. It was Clyde. His suit was damp from the rain, water dripping from his hair, yet he stubbornly held the umbrella over her head. "Let me take you home." Virginia stepped back, and before she could speak, a pair of headlights cut through the night. Barry's car pulled to a smooth stop in front of her, the window rolled down, and he said naturally, "Get in, the rain's getting heavier." Clyde's hand froze in midair. He watched as Virginia unhesitatingly opened the car door, and watched as Barry leaned over to buckle her seatbelt. "I'll take her home, Mr. Clyde. Please go back." Barry casually placed a pre-prepared thermos from the car into Virginia's hand. Only then did he look up at him, and then, without bothering to see his reaction, he drove away, watching their car disappear into the night. Clyde tasted despair for the first time. "Mr. Clyde." The lab assistant ran over with an umbrella, his voice filled with pity. "Why are you doing this to yourself? Dr. Virginia, she really doesn't want to see you anymore." Clyde looked up, rain dripping from his jaw. He opened his mouth, but suddenly began to cough violently, bending over as he coughed. A startling splash of bright red appearing in the palm of his hand, the assistant stumbled back half a step in fright. You're spitting blood." "It's nothing." He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and shakily stood up. "It's an old problem. In these past 3 years, without Virginia's medicinal meals, his stomach ailment had long since worsened into a gastric ulcer. Every time the pain flared up, he would remember how, no matter how late he came home, there was always a warm bowl of soup waiting on the table. But now, he couldn't even be bothered to take painkillers. As if the pain had become his only salvation, his phone vibrated in his pocket, the word mother flashing on the screen. Clyde immediately hung up, but the caller persisted. Finally, he took a deep breath and answered. "I told you not to contact me again. You're abandoning your own mother for that woman, Mrs. Brandon's sharp voice was laced with anger. "What kind of spell has she cast on you? You're like a beggar, squatting at her door every day. You've disgraced our Brandon family's name." Clyde looked at the light in the laboratory window and suddenly smiled. "When you treated your daughter-in-law that way, why didn't you consider the Brandon family's reputation?" "I was doing it for your own good. That kind of woman, with no education and no family background, she's now the lead of a national key project," he interrupted Mrs. Brandon, each word sharp as a blade. "While your so-called noble Zoe was expelled from the industry for academic fraud and now waits tables at a restaurant, it's been 3 years. In all this time, I've found so many suitable girls for you, yet you rejected every single one, even tried to cut ties with me completely." Mrs. Brandon's voice softened, tinged with pleading. "I'm begging you, as your mother, come home. You could have any better woman. Why must you cling to her?" "And I've told you more than once, no one but Virginia," Clyde said, closing his eyes briefly, forcing down the metallic taste in his throat. "But you insisted on doing those things that disgust me. Cutting ties was my only choice." The sound of a teacup shattering came through the phone, followed by Mrs. Brandon's labored breathing. "I'm your mother. Would I ever harm you, Clyde? Don't you know my health is failing? Must you torment me to death? You've been forcing me." He slammed the phone down, took one last look at the dark window of the laboratory, and turned to walk into the rain. On a late autumn evening, Virginia and Barry walked out of the new clinic's construction site side by side. The two of them had officially partnered up. preparing to open a traditional Chinese medicine clinic of their own. The medicinal herbs display area would be more reasonable on the right side of the entrance. Patients would feel the atmosphere of traditional Chinese medicine as soon as they walk in. Virginia nodded, about to respond, when she suddenly heard a rush of footsteps behind her. "Madam, wait." The voice was sharp yet somewhat familiar. Virginia paused, then slowly turned around. She saw Zoe wearing a faded old trench coat, her hair disheveled, and her face frighteningly gaunt. She stumbled forward, but was stopped by Barry's outstretched hand 2 meters away from Virginia. "What do you want?" Barry frowned, looking at the newcomer. Zoe flinched, but her eyes were fixed on Virginia. "Madam, no, Dr. Virginia, let's talk." Virginia's gaze fell on her pale face, her expression unchanged. "There's nothing to say between us. I know you hate me." Zoe suddenly became agitated, her voice rising several pitches. "But I'm truly desperate now. Because of academic fraud, no hospital will take me. And those thugs keep blocking my door every day demanding money." Her tears fell in large drops, making her appear even more disheveled. "I can't even pay rent anymore, forced to sleep in 24-hour fast food restaurants." Barry frowned, subtly shielding Virginia behind him. "You brought this upon yourself." Zoe turned a deaf ear, suddenly dropping to her knees with a thud, drawing startled glances from passers-by. "Please, can you say something good about me online? Just say there was a misunderstanding about what happened back then, with your current status. Just one word from you and I can find a job again." Virginia looked down at the hand gripping the corner of her clothes, her voice soft but every word clear. "Misunderstanding? Which one are you referring to? Was it instigating others to force me to kneel and apologize to you, or stealing my research results, or perhaps hiring people to humiliate me in the street?" Zoe's face turned ashen, her lips trembling. I was possessed at the time, but I've already paid for it, and Aunt Brandon. She had a stroke, now she can't even speak clearly, she just lies in the nursing home drooling all day. I did that day I went to her to ask for money, she called me a slut, so I pushed her down." A twisted flicker of malicious pleasure darted through her eyes, but when she looked up, only pleading remained. "I avenged you. For that, can you forgive me?" Virginia yanked her hand back, a ripple finally appearing in her eyes. She looked at the hysterical woman before her and suddenly felt an immense absurdity. "You pushed an old woman, and you think you were helping me? She deserved it." Zoe clutched Virginia's clothes tightly, shaking her and screaming shrilly. If she hadn't always been sowing discord, if she hadn't always said I was the daughter-in-law she truly wanted, I wouldn't have. "Enough," Virginia interrupted her, her voice as cold as ice. "I don't care about any of this. And I have nothing to say to you." Zoe froze, her expression shifting from anticipation to despair, finally twisting into a grotesque rage. She shot up, pointing a finger at Virginia's nose and spat. "Do you think you're so great now? You're just a slut who climbed her way up with men. If it weren't for that old man, would you be where you are today?" Barry stepped forward, his tall frame completely shielding Virginia. "Watch your words, I've already called the police." Hearing the words "called the police," Zoe frantically looked around, her bravado instantly deflating. She stumbled back a few steps, her eyes filled with fear. You just wait." Having uttered that utterly unthreatening harsh remark, she turned and ran, only to trip over her heel and nearly fall. Passers-by chuckled. Zoe didn't dare look back. Stumbling away and disappearing around the street corner, Virginia gazed in the direction Zoe had disappeared, her expression somewhat dazed, until Barry gently squeezed her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Only then did she withdraw her gaze and shake her head. "It's all in the past." She turned to look at the clinic under construction, her eyes rekindling with a spark. "Let's go. There are still many details to finalize." On a clear early winter morning, the clinic's sign glowed softly in the sunlight. Virginia stood at the entrance, watching the workers wipe down the last pane of glass. Barry came out from inside, holding 2 cups of hot tea. He handed one to her. "The main framework should be finished today." She took the teacup, and through the rising steam, her gaze fell on the street corner, where a black sedan was quietly parked. The window was half down, revealing Clyde's pale profile. Barry followed her gaze, his brow slightly furrowed. "He's here again." Virginia withdrew her gaze and said calmly, "Don't mind him." However, not long after, a truck slowly pulled up. Several workers unloaded brand new medical equipment from the vehicle, the packaging bearing the logo of an international brand. The lead supervisor approached Virginia respectfully and said, "Dr. Virginia, these were ordered by Mr. Clyde as a congratulatory gift for the opening of your clinic." Virginia hadn't even opened her mouth when Barry stepped forward, his voice cold. "No need, please return them." The supervisor looked troubled. "But, Mr. Clyde has already paid for them. What she needs isn't this," Barry said resolutely, his gaze sweeping toward the car at the street corner. The car window slowly rolled up as the vehicle drove away in silence. In the evening, Virginia finished tidying the clinic's medicine cabinet and pushed the door open to take out the trash. A cold wind hit her face, and she pulled her collar tighter. Just as she reached the trash can, a figure emerged from the shadows. Clyde stood there, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't rested in a long time. Virginia didn't stop. She tossed the trash bag into the bin and turned to leave. Clyde strode forward and grabbed her wrist. "Let's talk." She lowered her gaze to his hand and said coldly, "The divorce agreement has long been in effect. We are even. I know you hate me." Clyde's fingers tightened, then slightly loosened as if he was afraid of hurting her. "But I must explain what happened back then. It doesn't matter anymore." Virginia looked up at him, her gaze so calm it made him uneasy. "I don't care, I care." Clyde suddenly raised his voice, then immediately softened it as if afraid of startling her. "About Zoe, it was my mistake in judgment, but I never had any inappropriate thoughts about her. I just thought she was a hardworking student. That's why I looked out for her everywhere. Those dietary restriction lists, I never wrote them. At the time I was just replying to messages from the lab. Everything she sent you was fabricated. And my mother, those things she said to you, I had no idea about any of it. I've never said a single negative word about you in front of her." His words came faster and faster, as if terrified she might turn and leave again, but Virginia just watched him quietly, not a ripple of emotion in her eyes. "Clyde," she interrupted him impatiently, "are you saying all this because you want me to forgive you?" He froze, his throat tightening. "I just wanted you to know the truth. But does it matter?" She slowly withdrew her hand. "Whether you did it intentionally or unintentionally back then, the harm has already been done. And now, I don't need your apology, nor do I need your explanation." Clyde's face turned ashen, as if her words had deeply wounded him. He abruptly reached out to grab her again, but a strong arm blocked him. Barry had, at some point, come to stand beside Virginia, his gaze cold. "Mr. Clyde, please show some self-respect." Barry was pushed back half a step, and before he could steady himself, Virginia had already stepped forward, blocking him. She looked directly at Clyde, her usually calm eyes now filled with anger. "Don't touch him." Clyde's hand froze in midair, watching her protect the person behind her. His heart felt as if it had been tightly clutched by an invisible hand. The intense feeling of suffocation made it almost impossible for him to breathe. Clyde wearily lowered his hand, stumbled back 2 steps, and finally turned and walked away, his figure casting a lonely and long shadow under the streetlights. After that night, Clyde never appeared again. Later, Virginia heard from Mr. Black that Mrs. Brandon's condition had worsened, completely losing her ability to speak. While Clyde himself had developed severe stomach ulcers from prolonged anxiety and was hospitalized. After hearing this, she merely responded with a soft hum, continuing to lower her head and sort through the herbal medicine list in her hands. A year later, the clinic officially opened. The entrance was filled with flower baskets, with patients and colleagues coming to congratulate her. Mr. Black personally cut the ribbon for the clinic, grinning from ear to ear. "Virginia, this clinic of yours will surely save many lives in the future." Virginia nodded with a smile, her gaze sweeping over the pennants adorning the wall. One in particular stood out, emblazoned with 4 large golden characters: "Miraculous Hands, Benevolent Heart." Barry stood beside her, then suddenly pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Under the gaze of everyone present, he knelt on one knee and opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "From the day you decided to pursue your studies, I've been waiting for this moment." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with undisguised tenderness and resolve. "Virginia, will you marry me?" There was no clamor from the onlookers, just an instant silence, as all eyes focused on her. Virginia looked at the man who had accompanied her through her darkest times, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. She reached out her hand and whispered softly, "I do." Applause and cheers erupted instantly as Barry slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood up and embraced her tightly. Sunlight streamed through the glass window, casting a warm and radiant glow upon their entwined figures.